Do you know what happens when there is an overdose of calcium channel blockers? These medications, also known as CCBs, play a crucial role in the treatment of conditions such as hypertension, angina, and arrhythmias. However, an overdose or toxicity of these drugs can lead to life-threatening situations, causing severe hypotension, bradycardia, shock, and metabolic disturbances. There are two main types of CCBs that we often encounter in overdose cases. The first group consists of non-dihydropyridines, such as verapamil and diltiazem, which tend to have more pronounced cardiotoxic effects. The second group is dihydropyridines, which include amlodipine and nifedipine. Among these, a verapamil overdose is considered to be the most dangerous. It's essential to understand the pathophysiology of CCB toxicity, as this knowledge forms the foundation for effectively managing an overdose. Understanding the pathophysiology of CCB toxicity is integral to managing an overdose effectively. But what exactly happens in the body during a CCB overdose, you may ask? It's a complex process that begins when calcium channel blockers, or CCBs, start to block L-type calcium channels in the body. These channels are crucial for various physiological processes, and their blockage triggers a cascade of effects. Let's break it down. Firstly, there is a decrease in myocardial contractility, a term we use to describe the strength of the heart's contractions. This is what we call negative inotropy. In simpler terms, the heart isn't pumping as powerfully as it should. Simultaneously, there's a decrease in heart rate, or negative chronotropy. This means the heart is beating slower than normal, which can be problematic as the body is not receiving the necessary oxygen and nutrients it needs in a timely fashion. Alongside this, there's a reduction in atrioventricular, or AV, conduction. This is the electrical communication between the upper and lower chambers of the heart. When this slows down, it can lead to arrhythmias, or irregular heart rhythms, but it doesn't stop there. The CCBs also cause peripheral vasodilation. This is a fancy way of saying that the blood vessels in the body expand, leading to a drop in blood pressure. This can result in dizziness or fainting. Moreover, CCBs can decrease insulin release, leading to hyperglycemia, or high blood sugar. This can be harmful to the body, especially for those with diabetes. Lastly, CCB toxicity can lead to cellular energy failure. This means that cells aren't producing the energy they need to function correctly, resulting in lactic acidosis, a condition where lactic acid builds up in the bloodstream faster than it can be removed. As you can see, CCB toxicity has a profound effect on the body, disrupting a number of essential processes. These physiological changes can manifest as a range of clinical features. Understanding the pathophysiology of CCB toxicity is crucial in recognizing and managing this potentially life-threatening condition. So how does a patient with CCB toxicity present clinically? Well, the clinical manifestations are primarily cardiovascular, metabolic, and neurological. In the cardiovascular domain, patients may experience hypotension, bradycardia, or even an AV block. In rare instances, cardiogenic shock may occur, especially in cases of non-dihydropyridine toxicity, such as with verapamil or diltiazem. Metabolically, we see hyperglycemia, a key diagnostic clue, and metabolic acidosis. The blockage of L-type calcium channels decreases insulin release, leading to hyperglycemia. Meanwhile, cellular energy failure results in lactic acidosis. Neurological features are also observed. Patients might experience dizziness, confusion, or even fall into a coma in severe cases. It's important to remember that these symptoms are not isolated, but interconnected, painting a complex clinical picture. Recognizing these clinical features can expedite the management of CCB toxicity. Now that we've recognized CCB toxicity, how do we manage it? Let's dive right in. Management of calcium channel blocker, or CCB toxicity, is a medical emergency, often requiring intensive care unit attention. The first step in management is initial stabilization, paying attention to airway, breathing, and circulation, the ABCs. If needed, intubation may be required to secure the airway. Oxygen is administered to support breathing. Ensuring circulation involves setting up intravenous access through 2 large-bore lines, continuous cardiac monitoring, and regular monitoring of blood pressure and glucose levels. Once the patient is stabilized, we move on to gastrointestinal decontamination. This step is particularly relevant if the patient presents early, within 1 to 2 hours of ingestion. Activated charcoal can be administered, with a typical dose being 1 gram per kilogram of the patient's body weight. For extended release preparations, whole bowel irrigation using polyethylene glycol might be necessary. Next, we have calcium therapy, which acts somewhat like an antidote. It increases extracellular calcium to overcome the calcium channel blockade. Calcium gluconate is the preferred option, with calcium chloride offering a more potent alternative that requires a central line. A bolus of 10 to 20 milliliters of 10% calcium gluconate can be given intravenously, with repeat boluses or continuous infusion if needed. This helps improve hypotension and myocardial contractility. Cornerstone of modern CCB toxicity management is high-dose insulin euglycemia therapy, or HIET. This therapy enhances cardiac contractility, improves myocardial glucose uptake, and corrects metabolic dysfunction. The protocol includes an initial intravenous bolus of 1 unit per kilogram of regular insulin, followed by an infusion of 1 to 10 units per kilogram per hour. Dextrose is given concurrently to maintain euglycemia. During this therapy, it's important to monitor blood glucose and potassium levels due to the risk of hypokalemia. Vasopressors are used if hypotension persists. Norepinephrine is the preferred choice, with epinephrine or dopamine as alternatives. These are often required alongside HIET. Glucagon can also be administered, with a typical dose being 5 to 10 milligrams intravenously. While it is less effective than in beta-blocker toxicity, it can help by increasing heart rate and contractility. Atropine can be used for symptomatic bradycardia, but its effectiveness is limited in severe toxicity. Lipid emulsion therapy is used in refractory shock. It's especially useful in lipophilic drugs such as verapamil, acting as a lipid sink. Advanced therapies include temporary pacing for refractory bradyarrhythmias. Extracorporeal membrane oxygenation, or ECMO, can be used for severe refractory cardiogenic shock. It serves as a life-saving bridge therapy. While managing CCB toxicity, continuous monitoring and support are crucial. This includes continuous ECG, frequent blood glucose checks, monitoring electrolyte levels, tracking lactate levels, and monitoring urine output. Remember, it's not just about treating the symptoms, but also about ongoing care and monitoring. Every step taken, from initial stabilization to advanced therapies, is part of a comprehensive approach to manage CCB toxicity effectively. The goal is not only to save lives, but also to improve the quality of life for patients post-toxicity. So we've managed the CCB toxicity, but what's next? Well, monitoring is crucial in managing CCB toxicity. Continuous ECG, frequent blood glucose monitoring, keeping an eye on electrolytes, lactate levels, and urine output all play an important role. The ECG allows us to observe the heart's rhythm and electrical activity, crucial for tracking any arrhythmias or conduction abnormalities. Blood glucose monitoring is essential due to the risk of hyperglycemia in CCB toxicity. Regularly checking electrolytes, specifically potassium and calcium levels, helps us to prevent or address complications related to electrolyte imbalances. Lactate levels provide us with an indication of the metabolic state of the patient, and observing urine output helps assess kidney function and overall fluid balance. Next, let's talk about prognostic indicators. These are factors that can give us an idea of how severe the CCB toxicity is and what the patient's outcome might be. A patient with a verapamil overdose, for instance, is likely to have a poorer prognosis than someone who has overdosed on a different CCB. Sustained hypotension, severe hyperglycemia, delayed presentation, and ingestion of extended-release formulations are also associated with a poorer prognosis. Now, let's summarize some key points. First, hyperglycemia is a hallmark of CCB toxicity. It's a key diagnostic clue, so keep it in mind. Second, high-dose insulin euglycemia therapy, or HIET, is the most effective therapy. It enhances cardiac contractility and corrects metabolic dysfunction. Third, while calcium therapy can improve contractility, it's not the be-all and end-all. It's part of the management plan, but it's not enough on its own. And finally, in terms of severity, verapamil is the most dangerous, followed by diltiazem, then the dihydropyridines. Remember, hyperglycemia is a hallmark of CCB toxicity. HIET is the most effective therapy. Calcium improves contractility but is not definitive alone, and verapamil is the most severe CCB in terms of toxicity.